Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new build video with me, Sherman. Today I bring you the Avenger. That is right, the Avenger tank is back in this update with something new, something a little different than what I had before, something I actually enjoy using, a build that I didn't think I would like, but I do like this setup. It works out really well and it does do a lot more than what I expected. So the Avenger is an off tank. It can be used as a main tank in dungeons, and I want to say most dungeons, not all. Just like with trials, it can be used in most trials, not all. It's preference of play, so if you like this type of build, you can play it. It's up to you. I'm not holding a gun to your head, so. But let's go ahead and get right into it. Taking a look at the stats, as you can see, we have a 16k magic, a 31k health, 28k stamina, and we have a decent amount of magic recovery and stamina recovery, which is good for this build because you want to have both high stamina recovery and magic recovery for it to be manageable while you're tanking, so you're not having to rely a lot on synergies, but you still will need synergies and potions to make it work really well. Looking at the weapon stats, you can see we have a 2396 weapon damage with a 41% weapon crit, 22% spell crit. We don't need to worry about spell critical on this. Our spell resistance and physical resistance might look kind of low, but don't worry about that. I do need to grab the Mundus Stone for this, actually. Let me go ahead and do that. So, oops, not that one. Let me grab the right one. Actually, I think it's this one. Nope, 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 nope. Ritual. You could use the ritual if you wanted, but I am going to use, if I can find it, it's the one that's messed up. So we are going to go ahead and grab that and just to move it a little bit, and it's this one. That's the reason. So let me go ahead and grab this one. Let me just grab that. Let me move this out of the way. I'll just drop this right there. I don't care. As long as it... That's the lawyer, the lover, the mage, serpent, the ritual, shadow, steed. Did I miss one? It's right here. We're going to want this one. And there's a big reason why we want the Warrior Mundus Stone for this build. We want powerful damage shields. So I'll explain why in a second. Sorry about that. That was my mistake. I should have had that done beforehand. So let's go back in here. So as you can see, 2674 weapon damage, which is going to be really good for this. We do have Major Savagery because of Expert Hunter. We do have the Warrior Mundus Stone for the extra weapon damage, and we are using Tri-Stat Food. Going over here, we're going to take a look. We are using Tri-Stat Pots for the recovery of health, magicka, stamina, and then also magicka health and stamina recovery of 20% as well. Comes in handy with this build. So we are using the Longfin, Pasty, and Melon sauce food for the max health, magicka, and stamina. It works out really good for this. Now moving on to the gear sets, this is where things get changed just slightly, and that is because we are using Bloodspawn now, and Bloodspawn is excellent for this because it gives us that little bit of extra recovery we need, plus it gives us the ability to generate ultimate really fast, which is going to be great for this because not only for Warhorn but also for our Dawnbreaker, which is something we're going to be using quite a bit when we're in dungeons, maybe even some trials. When we're not tanking, when we can do some DPS, we can actually drop our Dawnbreaker quite a bit, and having that extra weapon damage does play into that as well. So as you can see, this has a 6% chance of generating the 14 ultimate, but that's okay because we will be taking damage. So the helm, the chest, and the legs are all infused. As you can see, the other set we're using is Night Mother's Gaze. And the reason we're using Night Mother's Gaze is for the 5-piece bonus. Whenever you deal critical damage, you apply Major Fracture to your enemies. being a tank with a two-handed, you don't have major fractures. So having this ability gives you that little bit of extra to do that. So, which is really nice. So on the sets here, we are using infused on the big pieces, like I said, with tri-stats. On the smaller pieces, we're using stamina with reinforced on the shoulders and the boots, and then Nirnhone on the gloves and the belt. We are using the other set as Plague Doctors for the max health, because using a two-handed and not having a shield, you don't get a lot of health benefits by using a shield to give you a little extra. With Plague Doctors, you can get that extra you need to give you the health pool you need to get to, so that's a benefit. So altogether, a really nice setup with this on the Nirnhone, on the smaller pieces, the bigger pieces, the reinforced, and then the infused on the big pieces to give you even more from the stat pools. So good. Moving on to the jewelry, we are using 2 weapon damage on healthy here to give us more health, because we are a wood elf. We don't have a way of getting extra health, so getting the extra health from this really plays well into this. And then on top of that, we have infused on the necklace to give us extra magic recovery, and we are using a magic recovery enchant. And then on our weapons, we are using 2 different weapons here. We are using a two-handed sword that is Night Mother's, and we are using a bow, which is Night Mother's, both infused with Crusher enchants. This not only improves our DPS, but it also improves our group's DPS, so it's a nice benefit to have both of those as that. So as I said, with the resistances, you can see it's kind of low, but we'll get into that in a second when we get into skills, which we're moving on to now. Make sure you get all your class passives. You never know what skills you might use in the future or in certain situations. Weapon skills, make sure you fill in all the weapon skill passives. They're very important, because you never know again when you might be using skills from those weapons. Light armor, you want the top 3. Medium armor, you want the top 2 and the bottom 1. I filled in this one because I am a wood elf and I get improved sneak anyways, so I figured a little bit extra wouldn't hurt for when I'm playing PvP or something. Heavy armor, all the passives. On to the world skills. Soul magic, make sure you get these. You don't really need them, but I like to have them because of what they do. Moving on to the guild. Fighters guild, you want all the passives. Mages guild, you just need persuasive will. Sigil Order, get all the passives because you are using a Sigil Order ability. Undaunted, get the 2 passives here. And then on to the Alliance, you're just getting Aggressive Warhorn and Resolving Vigor for the skills. And then moving on to the racials, get all the racial passives. So Wood Elf has some interesting passives. Increased stamina recovery by 21%. Max stamina and poison disease resistance. This helps you mitigate damage from poison and disease, and it basically you are immune to them, so not by a whole lot, but enough. And then of course you get the stealthy. Moving on to the crafting. Alchemy, get medicinal use, and then with provisioning, you're going to want Gourmand and Connoisseur. Alright, so going over the skills on the bar, starting with the first skill we have, we are using Crushing Weapon. Now, we don't actually use Crushing Weapon a lot. We have it here for if we need to just bust out some extra damage, but we also have it here for the fact that we get a damage shield from the Sigil Order skill line. Down here we get Concentrated Barrier. We also get Deliberation, which gives us, anytime we activate this ability, we also get 30% damage reduction. So if you need some extra damage reduction every time you activate this for the 2 seconds, the instant part where you cast it, you will get mitigation of 30%. But you also get this barrier that gives you a damage shield of 5,800, which is really good if you need to mitigate some extra damage and your other shields aren't working to help. Moving on to the next ability, we are using Brawler. As you can see, this gives us a damage shield. It does give us some damage up front and some damage over time. Not a whole lot, but enough. But it's mainly for that damage shield. And that damage shield gives us a 2,387 point damage shield for each enemy hit. And it lasts for 8 seconds. It's a very long-lasting damage shield, but that high damage shield is what we're looking for. The next ability we have on our bar is Blazing Shield, and Blazing Shield is 34% of our max health, and for each enemy nearby, that shield grows by 4%. So it goes up to 38% if we have one enemy so on and so forth. You get it. But when the shield absorbs all its damage, it explodes outwards, dealing 50% of the damage it's absorbed. So it's not only is it a mitigation ability, it's also a damage ability, which plays really well with this build. Moving on to the next ability, we are using Rally. We are using Rally to give us major brutality, to increase our weapon damage, but also it gives us a nice heal over time, and a nice big heal when it ends. Now, Rally is one of those exceptional skills that when you activate it, if you count down, or let it run its time, and say let it get down to, let's say, 15 seconds or something, which I'm going to let it do, and then I'll activate it again just so you guys can see, it will actually heal us for a huge chunk of health, which is really nice. So if we heal now, 15k health. So it can heal, it's a really good burst heal. So if you're in that dire need where you need health, you can just pop it again and get some extra health, kind of thing. It's like I said, really nice. And if not, you always have Vigor on the back bar. We'll get to that in a second. So moving on from Rally, the next ability we have on our bar is Wolfhunter. This is where we get our extra weapon critical. We need the high weapon critical to make sure that our Night Mother's Gaze procs to apply that major fracture. The more uptime of major fracture we have, the better. It also helps with DPS in groups, because anytime we use Brawler, the amount of enemies we can hit with this will also, for any of them that we crit on, will get that major fracture applied to them, which is also beneficial to our group. So the last ability we have is Dawnbreaker. Now, a lot of people are going to question why I have Dawnbreaker on here, but I'm going to be honest with you. It's to deal damage. That's it. It helps clear trash. It helps clear mobs. Just, that's it. So when you're playing in a trial and you're off-tanking, you're not always tanking 100% of the time. This gives you extra damage to bring to the group. Moving on to the back bar. On the back bar, we have Inner Beast for a taunt, because we do need to taunt enemies as a tank and as an off-tank. So we have this here for that purpose of taunting, and it's a nice synergy. Next up, we have Endless Hail. This is just a nice AoE, ground coverage, damage over time. Just beneficial to the group. Next up, we have Resolving Vigor. This is a nice group heal. As you can see, it heals for 10,000 health over 5 seconds, or every 5 seconds. So if I buff up, oops, and I forgot to switch weapons, but if I buff up with my Rally, and then I pop my Resolving Vigor with this, as you can see, my Resolving Vigor will hit quite high, and my Rally does too. So next up on our bar is Restoring Focus. This is the ability that you see on the ground there. This gives us our Major and Major Resolve, Major Ward, which increases physical and spell resistance by 5,280. It also gives us Minor Vitality and Minor Protection, increasing our healing received by 8% and reducing our damage taken by 8%. While standing, though, within the circle, you also increase your physical and spell resistance granted by 50%. So, if you look here, our resistances are really low, but if we buff up with this, and we stay inside our circle, we actually go to 27,000 and 24,000. Now, when you throw in Blood Spawn, we actually can go even higher. We can actually go to 30,000 in physical, 33,000 in spell resistance. And that's exactly where we need to be for our resistance mitigation to be viable. So it works out really well. Like I said, this build can be used in most dungeons, not all, but most, and it can be used in most trials in both normal and veteran mode. So it's kind of a win-win scenario here. But great for off-tanking in trials, great for main tanking in dungeons. Going back to the skills here, we do have Expert Hunter or Evil Hunter back here as well, and we have that here for that Major Savagery to increase our critical, because we still want that high crit even on our bow bar. The next ability we have, of course, is Aggressive Warhorn. This is essential to most tanks. This gives max magicka, max stamina, max health to us and our allies by 10% for 30 seconds. It also grants Major Force, increasing critical damage by 15% for 9.5 seconds, and that applies to us as well. That's why it's important to have it on the back bar with this build, because when you're in a dungeon or in a trial, you can pop your Warhorn. Oops. Let me get my buffs up. You can pop your Warhorn if I had it up and available. Let me get some stuff going here. Get some ultimate gen. Just gonna do this until we get our ultimate up there. And you will generate a lot of ultimate really fast with this build when you're in a dungeon or a trials scenario. And don't worry about your stamina. The way you keep stamina up on this build is heavy attacks. Lots of heavy attacks. And the nice thing about the build also is when you have all your shields up, 21,000 mitigation. So you can take some pretty big hits if you can manage timing and stuff like that. So... And that's the other reason why we keep our Endless Hail up too, is because it'll apply that major fracture a lot, and it helps it stay maintained. Alright, so here we go. We're going to pop our Warhorn, and you'll see we go up to 34,000 max health, 18,000 max magicka, and 31,000 stamina, which boosts everything on our character. Boosts our brawler damage, and it does affect the shield itself. Boosts this damage, boosts this the strength of our rally heal to a degree. It also boosts Endless Hail damage, the taunt damage, and then of course it also boosts the effectiveness of our heals from this a little bit too, because our heals are based off of max stamina. So really, really good overall setup for this build in general. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the CP, starting with the red tree. Very similar to my Death's Wind build, we have 66 in Ironclad. This reduces damage taken from direct damage attacks by 22%. We have 56 in the Hardy and Elemental Defender, both of these giving us a 12% reduced damage from Flame Frost, Shock, and Magic, Poison, Physical, and Disease damage. And then 23 into Thick Skin, reducing damage taken from damage over time effects by 10%. This includes Poison, other things like that. And being a Wood Elf, you already get immunity to poison and disease, so this really helps with that. But it also helps with fire, like burning, chilled, that kind of stuff. And this also stacks with these, so you're going to get 20% because you have the Rune Focus on these two, and this adds it up to 30%. And then this one will take all of that, pretty much any direct damage, and reduce it by 22%. When you add it with this 20%, that's a 42% reduced damage in damage reduction. And then you have all your damage shields. Moving on to this part, we have 40 into Bastion. This increases the effectiveness of damage shields by 16%. We have 19 into Quick Recovery, increasing healing received by 5%. Over here we have 56 into Warlord, reducing break free cost by 20%. 13 into Sprinter, reducing sprint cost by 8%. 23 into Bashing Focus, reducing our bash cost by 14%. Moving on over here, we have 43 into Arcanus, increasing magic recovery by 10%. Remember, we are a Wood Elf, so we already have a 21% stam recovery. We don't need more. So that's why we have this here. And then we have 43 into Tenacity, increasing our stamina return from our fully charged heavy attacks by 10%. This stacks with the extra 30 we get baseline, and the extra 30 we get for wearing, or 25 we get for wearing heavy armor. So we actually go up to a 65%. Moving on over here, we have 56 into Shadow Ward, reducing our block cost by 20%. 26 into Tumbling, reducing dodge roll by 11%. Either way, you can go with this. I like using the 56 because I do block quite a bit still. Not as much as I do when I run a sword and board. Moving on, we have 43 into Bless. This increases healing done by 10%. This works for Rally and Vigor. Moving on, we have 40 into Master at Arms, increasing direct damage, or damage done with direct damage attacks by 16%. Now, if you wanted to, you could take points out of other places and put into Physical Weapon Expert and Master at Arms, getting both of these up to, let's say this one up to like 20%, this up to 20%. which would help your light and heavy attack damage a lot, and it also give you Butcher, which is nice. But in this case, you'll get a Reposit, and as you can see, whenever you block an attack, you deal physical damage back to the enemy. This can happen every 5 seconds. You're not blocking a whole lot, so it's nice when it does happen. Moving on to the main blue tree for us. 43 into Mighty, this increases physical, poison, disease damage done by 10%. We have 56 into Thaumaturge, increasing damage done with damage over time effects by 20%. And then we have 66 into Precise Strikes, increasing critical damage and critical healing done by 22%. Now, we have this up to 66 for one reason: Vigor and Rally. We want those heals to be as big as they can possibly get because we are taking the most damage. We are getting hit the most. So ways we can mitigate that damage is through healing and our damage shields, and we're going to be using those most of the time while we're tanking to mitigate damage. We don't need a sword and shield to block because we're not a main tank, except for when we're in dungeons. And even when we're in dungeons, we don't need to block all the time. We just need to block certain things. Our shields will do the rest. And then we have 12 into Piercing, increasing our physical penetration by 1,191, which, by the way, if you look over here, we have a Crusher enchant that gives us 2,108. That takes us up to a 3,300 spell and physical penetration. Mobs in the Overland have a 9,100 resistance. So we can almost get the enemies down to no resistances in Overland, so it makes it a lot easier for us to solo play in Overland content, delves, and public dungeons, because all of those enemies in those areas have those resistances. So it works out for us in a beneficial way because it makes it good for us to solo play with these characters as well as tank with them. Alright, so that is the Avenger, but we're not done. I want to show you guys what this build can do inside of a trial itself. So we're going to take a little skip jump over here to Maw of Lorcage, and we're going to run around and just to show you guys how well this can work inside of a trial. Dungeons and trials are very similar in the way they work, so this will give you guys an idea of how well this build can mitigate damage, but it also show you how well it can work with not only mitigating damage, but also with survivability, sustain, all that. Because an off-tank shouldn't be just there to mitigate damage. They should also, and to debuff enemies, things like that. They should also be there to do something for the group. And adding a little bit of extra damage can be good. Now, if you wanted to, you can also swap out some abilities here for some stuff, but we'll get to that in a second. So, now, if you look, all these enemies have Crusher put on them right now, and they also have the Major Fracture because of Brawler and Endless Hail. I can keep Major Fracture on all of them. I can keep Crusher on all of them. It's just super OP. Remember what I was saying about that Dawnbreaker? Yeah, it becomes your main ability there. And if you guys haven't noticed, I haven't used a potion or anything yet. And it's because I don't need to. I know this build so well, I don't need potions anymore. I don't even need synergies to keep this build going. So there you go, and now the bosses have shown up, the mini bosses. I'll try my best. But you guys can see here, like, I can mitigate a lot of the damage. I just need to get out of this circle. And with having that good dodge rolling and stuff like that, I actually get to save some resources. And remember what I was saying about rally and vigor? You want to keep those going as best you can. There's that rally, that massive heal from it. Bam. And I'm done. But as you can see, the build works out really well for what it does. Exactly what I said it would do. It mitigates, it's got great survivability, and it works out really well. You just have to be really self-conscious in how to, like, approach this kind of scenario. So if you know the content, you can actually tank it out pretty well with this setup. So, but that's it pretty much for this build, guys. I hope it's one you guys like. I do love the Avenger build myself. It is one of my favorite builds to play in the game. I've been playing it for a very, very long time now, and we'll continue to be playing it. So, but that's pretty much it for this build video, guys. So if you guys like this build, hit that like button. If you guys want to see more builds by me, you can hit that subscribe button. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day, and this guy might see you in game. Bye.